All right, let's just jump right in. There's a headline making the rounds that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a movie plot. Curtis 50 Cent Jackson has been nominated as an ambassador to China. Yep, you heard that right. It's this wild mix of celebrity, big-time economics, and a totally new way of thinking about diplomacy. So let's break down what is actually going on here.
So what does the man himself have to say about it? Well, 50 Cent put out this statement. It's pretty direct, and it cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? He's looking at this purely through a lens of economic power and opening doors. Now, he hasn't officially accepted yet, but you can tell he's definitely listening.
So just to be crystal clear, yes, this is a real thing. The global music icon, the businessman, Curtis 50 Cent Jackson, has been formally nominated to be an ambassador to China. But as you're about to find out, this is not the kind of diplomatic post you might be thinking of.
And here is the single most important detail, the big twist in the story. This nomination did not come from the White House. It didn't come from the State Department. It's from a completely different type of organization, one with a very, very specific mission. And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, so if it wasn't the US government, then who's pulling the strings? Well, this whole thing is coming from a group that's leading what they call the FBA Diplomatic Initiative. And to really understand why they'd nominate 50 Cent, you first have to understand who the FBA are and what they're trying to achieve.
So, FBA. It stands for Foundational Black American. This isn't a general term. It's a very specific, lineage-based one for Black Americans who can trace their ancestry back to those who were enslaved right here in the U.S. And making that distinction is absolutely key, because the goals of this whole initiative are aimed squarely at the economic interests of this particular community.
And that brings us right back to the nature of this ambassadorship. The FBA initiative has been very, very clear about this. This is not about politics in the traditional sense. It's not about military treaties or state dinners. The entire focus is on building economic and cultural bridges.
You know, this quote from an FBA spokesperson really spells it out perfectly. They're not trying to replace the U.S. government. They're trying to build a parallel track, a separate lane, if you will. The whole idea is to create direct economic pipelines that don't have to go through the usual government channels.
So this all boils down to two massive questions, right? First, out of all the people in the world, why 50 Cent? And second, of all the places they could focus on, why China? The answers to these two questions really showed just how strategic and, well, modern this whole approach to global influence really is. Okay, so let's tackle the first one. Why him? Well, because he's so much more than just a rapper. The man is a global brand. He's got a serious track record of negotiating massive international deals, from music and movies to his liquor brands. His supporters say he gets capitalism and how power really works in a way that, frankly, a career politician might not.
And this quote from one of their policy advisors just nails the big idea they're running with. The thinking is that the game of diplomacy has changed. Today, real influence comes from access, from leverage, and from economic smarts just as much as it comes from a fancy title. And in their eyes, 50 Cent is the embodiment of that new kind of power.
So what about China? Why there? Well, it's pretty simple. It's all about the economics. China is a manufacturing and technology giant. You can't ignore it. And the goals here are really concrete. Forge trade deals for Black-owned businesses, create direct relationships with manufacturers, get entertainment deals done, and build new investment opportunities. It's a purely pragmatic economic strategy.
Now, you can't make a move this unconventional and not expect a huge debate to follow. As you can imagine, the public reaction has been all over the place, with some really strong arguments on both sides of the fence. So let's look at the praise and the pushback. So, on the one hand, you've got supporters calling this a genius, innovative move. They argue that this is a way to go around the traditional systems that have often left Black Americans out of the conversation on the world stage. But on the other hand, critics are pretty skeptical. They're worried this is more for show, more symbolism than actual substance, and they question if an unofficial ambassador can get anything real done.
But here's a fascinating point that one political analyst made. It doesn't matter if you love this idea or you hate it. One thing is for sure, we're all talking about it. And in the world of international relations, just getting everyone's attention is, in itself, a form of power.
To really understand how big of a deal this nomination is, you kind of have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Because this isn't just some random one-off idea. It's actually a key piece of a much larger strategy for a kind of self-directed global engagement.
See, this nomination is just one part of a bigger puzzle. The FBA movement is also talking about creating its own financial institutions, looking into ideas like digital reparations and pushing for official recognition in global forums. When you see it all laid out like this, the 50-cent nomination fits into a clear pattern, building independent power, both economically and culturally.
So where does this all go from here? Well, the ball is in 50 Cent's court. We're expecting a formal decision from him in the next few weeks. And if he says yes, this would be a hands-on job. We're talking about leading trade delegations, sitting at the table for major business negotiations, and putting together cultural exchanges. It would be a real working role, not just a title.
And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Are we watching the very beginning of a new kind of diplomacy? One where it's cultural icons and business leaders who build bridges between nations, driven by capital and shared interests instead of traditional politics. It's a pretty wild thought, and it's one this nomination is forcing all of us to think about.